Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session for Safeguarding Adults Week. This is a Partners in Care webinar. This is the first of a series of events with Telford and Wrekin Safeguarding Partnership, Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership, and obviously Partners in Care. We're here to mark Safeguarding Adults Week, and the theme for this week is working in partnership, which is why we're doing a partnership event. Our short session today is around establishing professional boundaries. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. So let's start off then. This is me. My name is Karen Littleford. I'm the Safeguarding Adults Lead for Partners in Care. My email address should be on the PowerPoint in front of you now if you want to make a note of that in case you want to contact me in the future. I work closely with partners across the independent and statutory sectors in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin and Cheshire to raise awareness of adult safeguarding and related matters, which is why we're doing a professional boundary session today. I represent Partners in Care at the Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership, Safeguarding Adults Board, and the Telford and Wrekin Safeguarding Adults Board and all of their connected subgroups. So I get to take information into those subgroups and equally bring it back out to influence the content of our training sessions. So that's me. Just pause for a minute in case anybody wants to make a note of my email address for future signposting and support. Okay, Partners in Care is the organisation that I work for. Partners in Care has a wide remit as a membership organisation for independent sector providers. We have members, and you can find out more information about becoming a member on our website. We deliver a vast array of training courses. We do lots of networking and events and around safeguarding. We do a safeguarding forum 4 times a year. We undertake projects with partners. We have a resources centre that you can access on our website. We have a YouTube channel. Did you know we have a YouTube channel? We do. And we share lots of safeguarding related and other relevant content on our YouTube channel. And we do things around bed vacancies. And you can find out more on the Partners in Care website. Our learning objectives for our short session today are quite brief. So we're going to be thinking about who professional boundaries apply to. We'll think about why it's important for us to have professional boundaries in place. At the end of the session, you'll be able to state what appropriate professional boundaries look like within your role. And we realise that the people attending the session today all come from different roles. We'll explain how a power imbalance could impact on working relationships. We'll identify the signs that professional boundaries are being blurred and how we might respond if we're concerned about professional boundaries in our organisation. So that, if you like, is our roadmap for our session this morning. What are professional boundaries then? So we're going to start off by thinking about what they are. Professional boundaries apply to anyone in a professional role who work with people receiving a service. Now, examples include therapists, coaches, social workers, GPs, care workers, support workers, healthcare workers, educators, clinicians, volunteers for organisations supporting adults or children and young people, advice agencies. Okay, so this is not an exhaustive list, but you can see those individuals who in their work or volunteer role have professional boundaries is quite wide actually, isn't it? So I thought that I'd get you to do something, even though it's a webinar and we're not being particularly interactive today. I thought I'd ask you to jump in the chat and give us your thoughts. Now, if you are watching this on playback because you're watching the recording, you can take a moment to reflect on this question. So the question is this: what do you think professional boundaries are about? Is it A, protecting the adults you support? Is it B, protecting yourself? Or is it C, protecting yourself and the adults you support in your role? So it would be great if I could have a look at the chat to see where people are going with this. And for those of you watching on catch up, you can obviously take a moment to reflect on your thoughts. What do you think? So for those of you who are sat watching this on playback, I can tell you that the individuals attending the session live are saying to us that it's C, protecting yourself and the adults you support when we think about professional boundaries. And I guess the question is, are they right? And of course they are. So when we think about professional boundaries, that's not just about protecting the adult you have direct contact with, it is also about protecting yourself as well. And I think it's quite important, really, to start from that point. Right, the next one. Again, reflect if you're watching back. If you're live in the room with me, it would be great if you could jump in the chat and tell us your thoughts. Professional boundaries involve either A, being a friend, or B, being friendly and approachable. Which do you think is the correct approach when you're considering professional boundaries? So, do we want to be a friend to the person, or do we want to be friendly and approachable? Are they the same or are they different? And for those of you watching on catch up and reflecting on that question, I can tell you that in the room, people are saying B, professional boundaries involve being friendly and approachable. And I think that's really interesting. And again, let's see if you're right. And of course you are. It is about being friendly and approachable. That's what we want our workforce to be, our volunteers to be when we're supporting people, friendly and approachable. But that's very different, isn't it, to being a personal friend? It's a very different situation. So let's have a look then at defining professional boundaries. Relationships are a fundamental part of social care, health, housing, third sector, advice agencies, etc. The ability to build meaningful and rewarding relationships with a range of individuals using services, including carers, can have positive effects on promoting the well-being of the people both delivering and receiving social care services. So this is not just about a one-way street. This is about both individuals feeling that impact. Individuals who use services are all different. So too are the individuals who make up our workforce. Developing good quality working relationships takes time and work. I don't know whether you would agree with that. I think it does, doesn't it, take time to build up a rapport with an individual. And a culture that supports the workforce to develop these relationships is crucial. And I don't think you can underestimate our workforce culture and how important that is when we're thinking about professional boundaries, how we develop them, how we establish them in the first place. Relationship-centred working may cause uncertainty for some about how to carry out their roles and responsibilities. Professional boundaries help us to make sense of this. So in other words, when we've got professional boundaries in place, that helps us really to direct how we behave when we're in that role, how we support people, how we interact. For example, the quality of your relationship with the individual is very important. Now, this bit's interesting. It's essential to create a warm, kind and friendly environment. I don't think any of us would disagree with that, would we? However, that sometimes is where the challenges can take place, because sometimes this closeness can blur those professional boundaries and create difficulties. So create difficulties not only for the adult directly receiving the care and support from our agency, from ourselves, but also for the person involved in their life, the worker in that situation, if you like. So examples can include things like sharing too much personal information or taking on tasks outside of your role. So we have to know, don't we, within our role, what is within our sphere of competency, if you like. What are we competent to do? What are we not competent to do? And when might we need to signpost to other agencies? Or when might we need to bring in other services to offer the things that we cannot do within our role, rather than sitting with it all on our shoulders? How do we make those decisions? And when do we need to do that? So I deliver professional boundaries training as part of my job role. So I've borrowed some thoughts from learners from within our workforce when they defined what professional boundaries are. So we've had the following: the boundaries that are put in place in order to maintain a professional working relationship between the client and the support worker. Understanding one's job role and acting on expectations and limitations of that role. So understanding the limitations of the role. So again, when do we need to bring in other people? Carry out your job role, working within your responsibilities without becoming too involved personally. That, in my experience, is the one that really does cause people a bit of a challenge. How are we in danger of crossing that line and becoming too involved personally? And the last one there, not overstepping the line, remembering you are not there to be a friend. So, whilst it's great to be friendly and approachable, and that's quite right, isn't it? We're not there to be a personal friend to the individual that we're supporting. So, a couple of statements, if you like, from other agencies. So, Social Work England, in their professional standards, talk about the role of social workers and professional boundaries. And they say, as a social worker, I will not behave in a way that would bring into question my suitability to work as a social worker while at work or outside of work. So I'm just going to pause for a minute there. So if you are a social worker, the standards are saying it's not just how you behave and what you do within that role, it's how you conduct yourself outside of work as well. So does that apply to everybody else who has a professional boundary, or is it just social workers that have that distinguishment, if you like? I don't think that just applies to social workers, does it? So when you think about your own role and what you get up to, perhaps outside of work, could that call into question your suitability to work in the role? So professional boundaries are wider than our 9 to 5 hours, if you like. And I know for many of you, 9 to 5 hours is not what you do. The relationship between a health or social care worker and a person they support is unlike informal relationships because it's initiated through the provision of a service regulated by professional bodies, and it is subject to an ethical code. So this comes from research. So what we're saying here is it's different to a friendship that you have with somebody because a friendship is informal, isn't it? But when you're working with somebody, that's a formal situation, whether you are a volunteer or a paid worker. You've met that person through your role in an organisation, and that's how you're carrying out that role through the codes of practice, the policies and procedures of that organisation. So it is quite a different thing. Now, I thought we'd have a short film now. And this film really features professional boundaries. It's a very short film, and I quite like it.
Imagine you created a beautiful garden, but you notice people walking through the grass, littering, or even picking the flowers you've grown. So you put up a fence to mark what is your space, and you now decide who can come in through the gate. This is how we would protect our garden, and is also how we should protect ourselves, by setting boundaries. Boundaries are limits we set for ourselves within relationships, be they romantic, professional, friends, or family. You want to clearly see where you end and someone else begins.
I describe boundaries like a roadmap of me showing you how best to have a relationship with me. It is me clearly expressing and communicating my values and preferences because I want you in my life.
Some examples of boundaries are physical boundaries, what you are comfortable with in terms of your own space and your own body. Emotional boundaries, what you are comfortable with sharing and what you would like to keep private. And time boundaries, how you would like to prioritize your own time and where you would like to take time to rest.
Okay. I quite like the kind of messages that film gives us. I like the analogy they used actually about the garden. You don't want somebody breaching your boundary in your garden, do you, and coming in and trampling over everything. And I quite liked how they reflected on that in terms of our professional boundaries. And they talked, didn't they, at the start about professional boundaries, but they also said we have boundaries generally with other people in our life, whether that's a romantic relationship, a friendship, or stepping into our work role. So we have boundaries in different elements of our life. Our professional boundaries apply, don't they, to our work role specifically, or a volunteer role. Okay, so in summary, when we're thinking about defining professional boundaries can be described as a boundary between what is acceptable and unacceptable for a professional, both at work and outside of work. So bringing it back to that idea that it's not just how we conduct ourselves within those work hours. The crucial element is understanding the difference between professional and personal relationships. And this is where people often struggle. If they're crossing that line and breaching those boundaries, it's because sometimes they just haven't recognised that there is a difference between a personal and a professional relationship. And so they've conducted themselves as if they're in a personal relationship, actually, when it's a professional relationship, and there are differences that we need to have in place. So let's think then about establishing those professional boundaries. So I would like you to reflect if you're watching this on catch up, or if you're live, I would like you to jump in the chat and just tell me, why do you think we need those professional boundaries? I am going to read some of that out, but don't panic. I won't add your names to it for the recording. So why do you think we need those professional boundaries in place? So we're just waiting for people to type. So for those of you watching this on catch up, that's a great opportunity, isn't it, for you to be able to reflect for a moment. Okay, some really interesting stuff actually in the chat. So what have we got? To keep us and the person we support safe, exactly right. Protect us and the client, yes. To keep yourself and the other person safe, we are naturally gregarious. I like that one, thank you. So sometimes we might have to manage ourselves differently depending on what aspect of our life we're in at that moment. To give direction of how to act towards each other and create a safe environment. Safe practice. Each party knows what to expect. It can help to get the job done more effectively. And it is about those expectations, isn't it? If people are clear on what our boundaries are, then their expectations are managed by that. To protect both clients and employees or workers from physical and emotional harm, to help maintain a safe working environment for all. This is great stuff, everyone. To maintain an appropriate relationship which is safe. And the last one I've got here is to ensure we both know our role and responsibility in this relationship. I really like those. We've got another one as well. Thank you. To avoid any confusion over the relationship. And I think that's exactly right. If we are clear on our professional boundaries, and that's the message that we give in our day-to-day practice, the people that we support are equally going to be clear, and they will know what their expectations are. And it does reduce the risk of confusion about what our role is at that moment in that person's life. So for all those reasons, I think what you've said is really important. So thank you for doing that. Okay, so let's carry on with that theme then about thinking about establishing our professional boundaries. The social care professionals is responsible for establishing and maintaining a meaningful and effective professional relationship with the individual, and that's the individual they are supporting. So we are responsible for establishing and maintaining. And I just want you to think, in your role, in your career, has there been a time when you've worked with an individual for a long period of time? And how does that impact on the ability to maintain those professional boundaries? If you've been working with the same person for a long time, supporting them, for example, does that impact on your ability to maintain those professional boundaries? Or does it become more challenging the longer you engage with the same person? It's a good point for reflection, I think. When we are establishing our professional boundaries, it's really key to work with our managers and our teams to gain an understanding of our professional role and our limits of that role, really. What are the expectations of us? And I wonder, how long ago did you read your job description? I just thought I'd put that question out there because our job description often gives us some guidance, doesn't it, about what is within our role and what isn't. And I think, if you've been in your job role for quite some time, you may no longer revisit your job description and have a look at that. Understand and keep to your organisation's policy on professional boundaries. Now, I understand that not all organisations have a specific professional boundaries policy, but you will certainly have connected policies. Things like gifts, things like confidentiality, physical contact. There'll be a whole host of policies connected to professional boundaries, even if you don't have a single policy. And the third point there, when you're establishing those professional boundaries, addressing any potential crossing of professional boundaries. So if you think there's a danger of crossing those boundaries, talk to your manager, talk to your team, talk to your seniors, get some support. And I think what this does is it gives us a message, doesn't it, that as our workforce, we are responsible, we have some accountability for our professional boundaries, understanding them, putting them in place, and also acting if we've got any concerns that either ourselves or someone within our team is at risk of crossing those professional boundaries. So getting in early to stop things escalating, really. Staff need boundaries to keep adults using the service safe, but also to protect themselves and avoid uncertainty or burnout. So if you're not clear on what your role is, and for example, where your role ends and we need to bring other people in to support the individual around different areas, if you have everything sat on your shoulders, you can see, can't you, how there would be a real risk of burnout. And I know over the years that I've been working around safeguarding and working around professional boundaries, that sometimes people don't get to talk about professional boundaries when they join the organisation. They might have a brief session around it, but maybe they don't get any training. And I've certainly had people say to me, I wish I'd had some training at the start of my role because actually I've made myself ill with worry. And that's real. And that sits under that idea of burnout, doesn't it? When you're sitting with it all on your shoulders. So, in terms of guidance, then, where can we get guidance? So, you will undoubtedly, in your role, have codes of conduct. Now, this could be a professional code of conduct. So, if you're a nurse, for example, you've got the Nursing and Midwifery Council, you've got your social work professional ethics, haven't you? If you're a social worker, those standards are there in place. Skills for Care and Skills for Health have a code of conduct for healthcare support workers and adult social care workers in England. You may work in a different role. You may not have a professional code of conduct. You could have an organisational code of conduct. Now, there would be an expectation that our employers promote those codes of conduct, whether that's a professional one or an organisational one. And the reality is that we can be held to account, can't we, against those codes of conduct. So our organisation can hold us to account. Now, the thing about a code of conduct or a professional standard is that they normally give generic messages. They don't go into great detail. They give us generic messages about how we should conduct ourselves in our role, where our boundaries lie, if you like. So on top of that, we would need to be looking at our organisational policy and procedure. Part of that is obviously our induction, isn't it, when we start our role? But ongoing policy and procedure is really important to give us key messages from our organisation about their expectations about how we behave within our role, what is within our role and what is outside of our role, and when we need to seek support from other agencies or other individuals. That's an example of some of the codes of practice, ethics, or standards that you may come across, and you may recognise on screen the one that relates to your specific role within this session today. Okay, so the Code of Conduct for Healthcare Support Workers and Adult Social Care Workers is quite an older document now, but still very relevant, and it does give very generic messages, which is why we need to refer to our organisation's policies and procedures as well. So when we're thinking about professional boundaries and really supporting our workforce, what are we aiming for? So I would like you, if you're accessing this session as a recording, just to sit and reflect for a moment. For those of you that are live, I'd like you to just drop your thoughts, if you can, into the chat for me. What are we aiming for when we're thinking about professional boundaries and our practice? What are we aiming for? How do we want that practice to look in reality? A couple of thoughts in the chat would be great. What do we want our professional boundaries practice to look like? So a moment to reflect for those of you who are watching on catch up. And also for those of you live, a moment to reflect and to type some thoughts. And I can see some are coming in now. So hopefully those of you watching on catch up have had time just to sit and reflect for a moment before I jump in and share some of the thoughts from those individuals who are attending live today during National Safeguarding Adults Week. Okay, oh, interesting stuff. I like that. Efficient, honest and clear communication. You can't really underestimate, can you, the importance of communication and to unblur any blurred lines. So again, going back to that idea of clarity. So when we are thinking about professional boundaries, what we are aiming for essentially is communication, it's clarity. Yeah, that's great. So clarity, discussion about what we can do and can't do. That's important. It's equally as important, isn't it, to be clear about what we cannot do and for this to be regularly revisited. So it's not just a one-off conversation sometimes with people, is it? Yeah, so having clear established boundaries with a friendly approach. I really like that. A friendly, approachable member of staff or a volunteer is always going to be a much better place to build a rapport with the individual that they're supporting. Transparent, honest, professional and fair. Brilliant, thank you. Contributing to positive outcomes for the client group we support, yeah. And a safe space, open, honest, focus on the goals of the adult who we are supporting. Great job, team. I think that gives us some really clear messages, isn't it, about what we are aiming for when we're thinking about our professional boundaries. So this is what I came up with when I thought about your question. You've probably done a much better job than me. Be empathetic, respond within the working relationship, be consistent. And I think sometimes that consistency is about a team approach as well, isn't it? If you've got different members of a team all applying those professional boundaries differently, think about how confusing that could be for the adult experiencing that. If people are not consistent, that can be quite confusing. Work within your competency. So know when to consult others and when to seek other support. Know when to signpost to other services. Be clear about what is within your role. And reiterating what was put in the chat, be friendly and approachable, but recognise that is different to being a personal friend. So for those of you who are watching this on catch up, I hope that's helpful in thinking about what we're aiming for with our professional boundaries practice. So let's think about recognising when professional boundaries are being blurred. So over to you again, teams. If you're reflecting now because you're watching this on catch up, that's great. You've got a minute or so to do that. If you're live in the session, I'd like to invite you to think about how you would recognise when boundaries are being blurred. What would ring your alarm bells, if you like, about your own practice or about a colleague or other volunteers' practice? How would you recognise when those boundaries are being blurred? And again, I'll give you a minute to sit and think about that question. So hopefully that's given you a chance to reflect on how we might recognise when those professional boundaries are being blurred. And I can see that we've got some thoughts coming in. So, interesting. So, terminology used when speaking about the individuals who receive support from our organisation. Yeah. Oversharing, being off topic and being inconsistent. Good thoughts coming in here. Sharing too much personal information and taking on tasks outside of your role. Definitely. Thank you. Contact outside of work, texting or calling, maybe dropping in to see that person when actually you're not working or supporting them that day. So what's going on there? Taking the person to your own personal space, perhaps taking the person to your home. And when you think about your home space, that is very personal, isn't it? So, you are now inviting that person into your personal life. And again, how does that fit in with the idea of being friendly and approachable, but not being a friend? Maybe boundaries are being blurred when an individual member of staff or volunteers trying to help with areas of the individual's life in which they're not trained to help with. It's not the remit of the role to do that. Accepting or giving gifts, yeah, and you should in your organisation have a policy that covers that. Might be worth reflecting on that after today. That's an interesting one. Focusing your thoughts on one client rather than the others. So all your endeavours and efforts are focused on one person who accesses your service. So again, there's something there about inconsistency, and what is that about if that's happening? Taking calls out of work time. So, you will, won't you, for some of you have on-call arrangements in your organisation. But actually, if you're not on call, should you be taking those times? Go back to that idea as well about burnout for workers. Our workforce can experience that if we are not having any time away from our role. Great job, team. And so for those of you who are watching this on catch up, I hope that was helpful. Recognising blurred boundaries. So you might notice a colleague is crossing the line, or you might be fearful that you are at risk of crossing the line. We've done sharing too much personal information. You've touched on gifts, being over familiar with the language. What about terms of endearment? Love, duck, darling, honey, sweetheart, sugar plum fairy, mate, bud, dude, rather than using the adult's preferred name. Again, somebody mentioned that one, spending more time with one individual than others who you support. It's almost like you've done this course before. Sharing personal contact details with the adult. So maybe you give them your own mobile phone number, your personal email address. What about social media? We haven't really mentioned that so far. Somebody accepts someone that they support as a friend on social media, sharing personal information via social media. Again, those lines are blurred, aren't they? That's your social media account. And communicating with the adult on those social media channels. I think particularly things like Facebook as well. Even the language, you are a friend, aren't you, on Facebook? So even that language opens up that difference in relationship. Breaching confidentiality. What about a worker or volunteer who is doing favours? Becoming a friend rather than being friendly and approachable. And this last one here, what about misusing power? So we each have a responsibility to recognise the power we have in our roles. And let's be honest, we don't like to think that we have any power in our role, do we? But the fact that we're working under the umbrella of an organisation means that other people may perceive us as having power, even if we don't think we do. We should recognise that there might be a power imbalance between staff members, as well as between workers and the people that they support. So there is a challenge, isn't there? Sometimes we might notice a difference in a colleague's behaviour. Equally, we might notice a difference in our behaviour, and we might think that we are in danger, really, of crossing those boundaries. So I guess we might need to think about, what do we do if we are finding ourselves in that situation? So if you are concerned about your own practice or the practice of a colleague, I guess our advice would be speak to your line manager in the first instance if you are concerned about boundaries, whether that's yours or a colleague's. Follow your organisation's policy and procedure about raising concerns in the workplace. That may include whistleblowing, speaking up, disclosure policies, because you all call them different things in your organisations. You may, unfortunately, have a situation which is quite serious. Prevention isn't an option here. Something quite serious has already happened. So do we need to think about things like criminality? Has a crime taken place here? Do we need to think about our safeguarding arrangements for supporting people? So do we need to think about bringing other agencies in around criminality or safeguarding concerns? Are there immediate risks? Do we need to take urgent action? So those are just some of the things that we might need to think about in terms of our responsibility and our accountability. And I guess equally, my advice to you all would be around professional boundaries, don't go it alone. If you've got concerns about the practice of a colleague, or if you've got concerns about your own practice being at risk of crossing those boundaries, please consult your organisation. Go to your line manager, have those conversations. And sometimes it is about exercising professional curiosity. Now, sometimes that might be called being respectfully nosy, but it is about having that feeling sometimes, isn't it, that something is not quite right. Maybe you have a gut feeling something's a bit off. Maybe you've noticed a difference in your colleagues' practice. Perhaps you have a conversation with them, check in with them and ask them if everything's all right. You might support them to go to their line manager to have that conversation. If they're struggling perhaps outside of work and that's impacting on their ability to manage their professional boundaries in the workplace, professional curiosity is really key in bringing these things to light so that we can address them. So that was a very short session on establishing professional boundaries. If you are interested in booking some professional boundaries training, which we can run on Zoom, or we can run it face-to-face in your organisation or at other venues, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can use our general info@partnersincare.org.uk email, or you can book a place on our generic sessions, which run throughout the year, either face-to-face at our Partners in Care office or on Zoom. And you can book those places on our website under the training section. So it's called Professional Boundaries in Social Care and Health. I can deliver bespoke sessions to any kind of service around professional boundaries. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with us if you are interested in any of those other areas. Thank you all very much for joining us today, and thank you for watching this on playback.